I know. Chapter 2. Too often we underestimate the power of a touch, a smile, a kind word, a listening ear, an honest compliment, or the smallest act of caring, all of which have the potential to turn a life around. I was gifted with many concussions throughout my life. The first one was when I was just a toddler and went tumbling down the staircase in my bunny pajamas after having climbed out of my cage of a crib. As I grew and played with siblings and neighbors, I knocked my head in many different ways. The most significant was when I put my new English bicycle brakes on exactly the way my father warned me not to. And I went over the handlebars onto the rock that I tried to avoid and into my bed for the summer. That time, I was out for 3 hours before I knew I was going to be relegated to a darkened room with no playtime for an entire summer. I skied, climbed rocks, and rode horses. I walked into my father's shovel and was rewarded with a frontal lobe full of stitches. I fell twice on the rock formation that we used to love to play on across the street. It was a large, flat rock that sat about 12 feet off the ground. Buried next to it was another rock that was shaped like a half-buried back of a dinosaur, and there was a 2-foot dirt space that was like a silent escalator to the top of the rock. We called it the dancing rock. I remember it as my nemesis as I fell on that rock 2 summers in a row and had half a dozen stitches each time. People would ask, "Why did you do it twice?" I could only reply that I simply did not know. It was just my ability to be living with total abandon in the countryside, always seeking a new activity to keep me occupied. I had more than 12 knocks on the head. The first 11 seemed to be of no consequence. I did very well in school. I earned a full scholarship to a private secondary school. I obtained 2 degrees and almost a third, owned and operated my own business for 15 years, and was able to perform most sports with finesse. I thought I was just like everyone else, normal. That was until this last time. I remember the date because it's the same number as Christmas, February 25th, 2015. I have to say something here. I wrote this when I was really concussed and I was using sticky notes to keep track of my thoughts. So when I say here, it's the same number as Christmas. Of course, we know the 25th is Christmas, but it's not February, it's December, but that's how I remembered it. Anyway, after coming to, I was angry and fixated on getting to an appointment. I thought I was fine, and then over the course of a week, my brain morphed into a creature that I had no control over anymore. I stammered, I stuttered, I had no balance. I slept continuously, and I was angry, very angry. I could not add 2 two-digit numbers in my head. Heck, I couldn't even add single-digit numbers. My doctor told me that I could improve over time, but it would be a wait and see game. This was not a happy proclamation to hear. It became apparent that I was not going to improve very fast or very soon. I lived alone and I had no idea what I should do. I had always eaten right. I had just recently entered the clinical portion of a nursing program and was excited. That was a huge disappointment, as at 60 years of age, I was completely lost as to what I might be able to do. I had no job, no health care insurance, and no one to help me. I had quite the pity party. I get a little emotional when I read this because I don't like to live in the past. So when I go back to the past, it's still there. So yeah, it's hard to look back sometimes. Anyway, I will continue. It had been almost 2 years since my TBI, and I had spent an immense amount of time having my own private sulk. My friends and social activities evaporated, and I felt terribly alone. There was, however, the regular doctor visits. I'd known Dr. Sam for 25 years. Oh, I said 20 years. And he was at a loss of just what to recommend. He really was. He told me that someone of my age just might have to face the reality that coming back from where I had begun may not be in my future, and that I needed to be patient and rest. He understood how concerned I was and that I had a lot going on, yet when I looked into his eyes, I could tell that he was stumped. I was not his first patient who had had a TBI. Every week, he talked about another one of his patients, a man my age, like this was some sort of qualifier, and how although he had been employed as an engineer, had been good at what he did, and had been an accomplished business owner of his own firm, he had difficulties for 4 years still. The message was clear. Sam did not have great expectations for a positive outcome for me. I was always miserable after I left. Who wouldn't be? During the initial 2 years of my injury, I experienced a host of frightening and debilitating symptoms. The worst of it all was that no one really got it. I stammered like a stuck jackhammer when I tried to express myself. I was always cognizant of the person I faced and that they were equally uncomfortable. They often tried to diffuse the tension of the conversation by telling me that I looked great, that I was doing so well. My favorite was when people would tell me that they didn't even notice my speech impediment. I had a balance issue, so my biking was out of the question. Actually, any physical exertion was an instant headache producer. Just walking to my mailbox an eighth of a mile away brought on the crown of thorns pain that would result in extreme fatigue and hours of sleep. I was unable to focus on things. I had a small mountain of newspaper clippings and notes to myself on sticky notes that I stuck everywhere in no particular order. I loved the colors. The information sometimes was recorded several times as I failed to remember that I had already recorded that need to know item. I became accustomed to the chaos, yet the sounds outside my home were maddening. Initially, the grocery store was absolutely out of the realm of my ability. The few times I tried to navigate the once familiar aisles of my grocery store, I became lost. A friend brought me to get 3 items one day. I was in the store for almost an hour before she came in and found me. I was distracted by everyone around me. I felt like I was in that movie, Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. And if you're not familiar with that, suffice it to say that it's one of fun-loving, crazy dad's inventions, shrinks the kids, and they end up being so small that bees look and sound like jumbo jets. Everything is magnified. Everything. This is the effect the crowded grocery store had on my brain. I heard all the conversations. I looked at all the jars, but I was not able to identify the tall ketchup bottle mixed amongst the shorter green relish jars. I was easily distracted and unable to remember what I went to the store for. I was rescued from myself, and I don't think I ever actually bought what I went in there to buy. I had not been advised about the benefits certain foods and supplements could provide, and had absolutely no idea that screen time was damaging to my recovery. Living alone had its benefits, as I did not have to put up with any surprises. I hated surprises. They made me feel even more out of control than I was. I had 2 dogs, and I credit them for keeping me on a schedule of sorts. Immediately after my accident, I had fallen and broken a rib. That was a trip back to the hospital a day later. I credit my dogs with providing me a reason to rise every morning. If you've ever had a broken rib, you know what I'm saying. If you've never had, I can tell you with all sincerity that I would rather give birth to triplets in a cave in the desert with no one to help me than ever have that pain again. Breathing hurts. Our ribs have to move, so there's no splinting going on there. I just wanted to be still so as to not feel the pain. But Bosco and Dylan had to be fed, so I had to move. It's hard to be cheerful when one is in this state. I knew that I needed to be more positive, yet I was stuck. as the stuttering and my habit of repeating myself seemed to make people's eyes roll back in their heads. I saw it. I was left to myself by myself more often than not. My two children worked full time, and as they had a great deal of difficulty in understanding what I was actually going through, they became frustrated and stayed away. I can remember my son telling me that I just needed to try harder. And my daughter would tell me with her soft, kind manner, "You can do it, Mom." My brain was scrambled and constantly ricocheting from one thought to another. Following through on projects was not a possibility. And if and when I tried to continue, I forgot where I had begun. Social occasions were hard. The ambient noise, meeting new people over and over and over, and always saying to myself, I think I've met them. Then I would just ride out the conversation, waiting for a clue as to whether or not this was so. Frankly, I was doing everything wrong, and it was not until I was able to get out of the house and visit the local coffee shop that I began to come out of my brain fog and general disorganization. The daily trip to the coffee store, and I had not been a coffee drinker since I was 32 years old, was one that I used as a training tool to help me learn how to remember people and their names. You see, it wasn't just the name, it was also an inability to match the face with the story, the way most normal people do. It took me 3 years to know the names of the wonderful, kind, patient people who I interacted with 6 days a week. The baristas changed every few days, and that was always a test. The owners, Kathleen and Will, were caring and generous with their conversation. I felt like I had a community there. But I only ever stayed long enough to place my order and leave with it in my hand. The combination of voices and the echoing off the walls of the cozy room was way too much. On occasion, I would sit at one of the 4 stools at the counter and attempt the New York Times crossword puzzle that everyone shared daily. Luke, one of the baristas, was usually the one who seemed to get the most and the last words of the puzzle. It was impressive, and I admired his intellect. It made me miss my former self. The cozy coffee shop, filled with somewhat familiar faces, was good for me. The daily routine began to take shape, and I became comforted by it. I had a difficult time coming to terms with my inabilities in social situations, yet eventually I relaxed into the saddle of discomfort and turned my horse in the direction of acceptance and wonderment. How had I come to be in this place, experiencing continuous headaches and fitful nights sleeping, yet extreme exhaustion during the day? It was not uncommon for me to fall asleep sitting up at 1 p.m. I had never been a napper. I forgot everything, despite keeping 3 different planners. Yeah, that was a real trip. No one should ever do that. It's true, don't do that. My self-sabotaging techniques were amusing to me over time. That is what began to save me, my ability to laugh at myself. The initial anger and frustration finally wore me down, and I just had to laugh. When I met strangers, I relieved my inadequate feelings by announcing almost immediately that I was recovering from a brain injury, and therefore, that's why I stuttered. I apologized that I might say too much. It was this whole introductory paragraph I had that I presented. This was my way of relaxing myself so as to be able to be in the presence of someone new, because I found it difficult to express myself through words as I once had. Yeah, I couldn't find the right words. My vocabulary was totally shot. I mean, I just couldn't access certain words. And it really made me troubled. And I'll keep reading because you can see from time to time, I'm like that still. I felt terribly defeated, and my self-esteem was at a never before experienced, bottomed out, stuck. It could be paralyzing unless I gave my introductory speech. I was learning how to relax. There was another thing I did to relax that was not so helpful. I began smoking again. I smoked before I had children for about 5 years. I was cool, a fine arts major with smattered dry clay, knees ripped and frayed jeans. You know, the cigarette was my Valentino accessory, or so I thought. Smoking was a relaxing part of my day. Actually, besides the daily walk on the beach with my dogs, it was the most looked forward to part of the day, a butt and a glass of red wine. This, as we all know, was the last thing I should have been doing, for many reasons that I will expound upon later. It's always important to note that my world was turned sideways and around, and my TBI picked me up like a dirty, evil cyclone and deposited me back in a time of disenchantment and confusion. I returned to Dr. Sam this particular day and asked him if there might be someone I could see who specialized in TBI recovery. Staying at home alone with 2 dogs 7 days a week wasn't helping. I believed that if I could know exactly what was happening metabolically, I could change it. As a former educator, I knew that when people are provided a reason that makes sense to them for doing something, they will do it. I needed a better reason than knowing things had to change. I wanted to know why they weren't changing quickly and what exactly was happening. I wanted someone to tell me exactly what my problems were. I wanted the scientific map of the state of my being. I could navigate that. I would be able to assign and research tasks to conquer and correct the deficiencies. All I needed was the plan. A prescription of patience and rest was not doing enough soon enough. I had tests done by a neuropsych doctor who Dr. Sam referred me to. The testing took a few weeks and I could only do about an hour's worth at a time. As my lethargy, headaches, and oh yes, I think I may have forgotten to mention, my eyes had changed. Now I was wearing a different prescription pair of glasses. To this day, light still is tiring and headache producing. And to this day too, as I'm reading this, that's true. I always wear my sunglasses, and that's primarily why I started wearing this hat all the time. I have a large collection of sunglasses. Elton John and I have that in common. Shoes are not my thing, but he has fabulous collection of sparkles. I needed more sparkles in my life. The results of the test provided some sparkle. The day I sat with the doctor to review the results, he began with a statement that after having considered everything in the subsequent evaluations and his time in the industry working with TBI individuals, he truly knew what difficulties I was having, and he was sorry. I cried. I did. I was finally validated. I wasn't crazy. There were definite reasons and actual events occurring inside my brain that were creating my daily angst. I was not imagining things, and I could deal with this. As a TBI survivor, I wanted to figure out exactly what I needed to do that might benefit me. What could help? For as long as I could remember, I was always excitedly engaged with life, my job, my children, my family, my friends, and my sporting activities. I loved to compete at anything and everything. Being physical had always been my anxiety release, and now that that was taken away, I was trying to figure it out. I also discovered that because I was a kinesthetic visual learner and had watched Michael Phelps' videos ad nauseum, my formerly finely tuned athletic body, and I'll say formally, and my visual learning style combined with my brain injury resulted in an ability to swim with ease. It did. It was really cool. And it still is. This was witnessed and remarked about by my swim coach, Jack. He is a beautiful, kind soul and had been a swimmer all his life, a competitor, a coach, and a lifesaver who jumped out of helicopters into the warm waters off the Florida coast. People came from all over New England to be coached at this place. After I had been swimming for about a minute, the first time, Jack stopped the pool jets and asked me, "How long have you been swimming? When did you learn to swim?" When I answered, he said, "Gail, I don't know what to say. I really have never had anyone quite like this for your first time here. I don't have much to correct as far as your stroke goes. We'll just have to build up your cardio." Hot damn. I was going to be able to be an athlete again. I did not have to worry about losing my balance in the pool. It's hard to get hurt that way. I was elated and encouraged, which helped me change a few things for the better. Now, my comfort meals of mac and cheese with Maine lobster, it's cheap here in the winter, were going to be replaced with the foods that I ate pre-TBI. I was beginning to believe in myself. The promise of being able to work out and swim was enough to boost my spirits and to help shift my thought patterns from what I couldn't do to what I could do. It also helped me to want to resume the healthy habits I had before. The pity party was closing down. Previously, there were days, sometimes a series of days, when I could not even motivate myself to get out of bed, take a shower, and change my clothes. Then one morning, things would change. Knowing that I could work on a goal helped me feel a bit like my old self without the workout schedule. I now could do more than 3 things in a day, and I was able to feel relief because that was so. I had no idea the influence and power my decisions or lack of would have in regard to the outcome of my recovery process. After my initial diagnosis, I was sent home from the hospital with a piece of paper that said I had had a moderate concussion and included its description. There were no suggestions for things that might be helpful to accelerate my healing. I want to repeat that. There were no suggestions for things that might be helpful to accelerate my healing. I was exhausted and confused and just wanted to sleep. Most importantly, there was not one person who asked me if I had anyone to help me. It has been and continues to be difficult for doctors, tests, and therapists to immediately and accurately diagnose the effects and potential outcome of some brain injuries. Symptoms can develop over the course of days, weeks, or years. In my case, it was a bit of everything. Unless you have a significant brain bleed that shows up on the initial scan, accurately determining the precise nature and setting off alarms for known potential consequences of this type of TBI. An unseen head injury is difficult to assess without administering the right tests. I was told that mine was not something serious. It was just something to get over. It has been over 5 years and I still have symptoms. There are still tests to be done. I'm telling you this so you don't wait. Check the list of specialists and diagnostic tools in Chapter 3 for more. TBIs have been called an invisible injury. It's an accurate description. When you are seen by others, you appear normal until you speak with a stutter or perhaps hesitate every 3 words. While it once was easy for you to retrieve vocabulary and formulate conversations, people tend to politely ignore that aspect of your new personality. They are uncomfortable acknowledging it. As I experienced this regularly, I became angry as I felt misunderstood. It made me withdraw more and not want to be around many people. It was easier to be alone than to have to look into the eyes of my son or daughter and see their obvious concern and frustration. I had to figure this all out. I had to. I was the only one who could. It's up to you over time to decide what feels best. I can't stress this enough. If it doesn't feel good, don't do it. You must check in with yourself throughout the day and take note of what is working well for you and what your challenges are. Keep that notepad with you throughout the day and jot down reminders of your symptoms as you are apt to forget. This information will be of great value in guiding you on the best path for your recovery and for sharing accurately with your healthcare providers. I would often forget to mention what struggles I experienced as I would get distracted. I would like you to get what you need to have a good start at getting better. The next chapter will begin to reveal a way for you to design your own customized plan. Let's figure out what you need. Imagine a goal, and let's go.